For years, the principal conductor of the New York Philharmonic, Alan Gilbert, stood astride the music scene like a colossal peacock, doing little for his orchestra, which he allowed to deteriorate into a sloppy shambles, while he went about giving lectures and signing autographs for his few fanboys. But now Gilbert is gone. He's been replaced by Dutch conductor and violinist Jaap van Zweden, who gave his opening subscription series this weekend. Under his baton, the transformation was obvious. The orchestra is no longer sloppy. Now it is merely unmusical. The concert opened with the debut of Filament, a new work by contemporary composer Ashely Fure, which sounded like a parody of late 60s experimental music, which I don't think it was intended to be. The orchestra was supplemented by 3 soloists in casual hipster attire on spotlit pedestals, and they were in turn supplemented by 15 moving voices, so-called, singers who prowled around the audience with black plastic megaphones that resembled witches' hats. The piece lasted 14 minutes and breaks down roughly as 10 minutes of demonic possession, followed by 4 minutes of a traffic accident in the Holland Tunnel. And this particular interpretation, however, was not advanced by the composer herself, whose stated goals included to democratize proximity and to activate a theater for the social. I do feel compelled to note that once the singers had finished hissing into their megaphones like a suite of deflating tires, and once Van Zweden had turned slowly and balletically to stare at the audience and the lights had been gradually dimmed to black, we were not left feeling that our proximities had been particularly democratized. But the audience loved it. A few people stood up to applaud, all sides bubbled about how cool it was. Fure was followed by Beethoven's Emperor Piano Concerto, for which Van Zweden was joined by world-famous Russian pianist Daniel Trifonov. The Emperor was Beethoven's 5th and final piano concerto, an epitome of his middle style, uniquely and typically Beethovenian in its unusual approach. The first movement opens not with a theme, but with a cadenza flourish that bathes the piano in the home key and prepares the audience to be launched into the concerto like a warm-up for the opening pitch. The beautiful and romantic second movement is glued directly into the rondo finale, a technique with which Beethoven had experimented in his Appassionata Sonata. Here, Van Zweden and Trifonov teamed up to bring out the least in the music. Their performance was boring, methodical, dramatically uninteresting. Trifonov, wearing a narrow gray necktie that dangled down his shirt front like the highway to nowhere, put plenty of energy into the keyboard but tried to play Beethoven as though it were Chopin or Tchaikovsky. He couldn't get his foot off the damper pedal and blurred all the sharp passages. Van Zweden conducted as though his sole object was to make sure that all the notes happened. I got the sense that Beethoven was on the program only because it is a statutory requirement. Both conductor and soloist sounded as though they wished to be doing something else, which is probably the truth. This performance was followed by a lengthy standing ovation, which left a small scattering of audience members, including yours truly, sitting in their seats, sadly shaking their heads. The highlight of the evening was the second half of the program, an exceptional rendering of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and this was an extraordinary performance. The acoustic space was better served by the larger ensemble, twice the size of Beethoven's orchestra, and Van Zweden brought out every ounce of the piece's huge stored energy. The Rite of Spring debuted in Paris in 1913 and prompted a hostile demonstration from the audience. Most reviews at the time skewered the work as barbaric. Now, wherever it appears on a concert program, it serves as a tacit warning to the critics. Be careful what you say about new music, because you're probably just behind the times. In this case, we should presumably be cautious about criticizing the new music of Ashely Fure, but there is an important difference. Stravinsky's work was a simulation of barbarism. In that respect, it's a highly successful phony. Stravinsky didn't like Beethoven, but he knew Beethoven. He knew Beethoven very well. A composer who doesn't know Beethoven, or a conductor who can't play Beethoven, is like a mathematician who can't add, or a writer who can't spell. Beethoven is one of the great cornerstones of musical civilization and of Western culture more broadly. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring could only distance itself from Beethoven's classical tradition by taking a measurement from one point to the other. Fure's work is the reverse. Genuine barbarism, phony sophistication. Fure doesn't have to pretend not to know Beethoven. She actually doesn't know Beethoven. His music would never have interested her enough to study, even for the purpose of rejecting it. In that respect, Fure perfectly suits the audience who sat listening that night. a new audience and a new generation of concertgoers that has never listened to Beethoven, but that does know what screaming sounds like. The thing is, you could never fool a regular New Yorker with something like that. If a truck driver or a plumber felt like listening to a traffic accident, he'd know where to find it. The cultural elite, however, are willing to pay for it and actually want to pay for it. It is their badge of betterness. Van Zweden may not have a great feel for classical music, but I guess he's giving his audience the orchestra they deserve.